Ghana's Supreme Court is about to decide a very fascinating question of law. Wesley Girls Senior High School, one of the most prestigious all-female second cycle institutions in Ghana, has allegedly drawn a line in the sand. Muslim students cannot manifest their religion by praying, fasting, and wearing hijabs. The Attorney General of Ghana has filed papers supporting the school, and the entire nation is holding its breath, waiting for a judgment that could define religious freedoms for a generation. But here's what most people don't know. Kenya already fought this battle, and the surprise is at the end. It's June 2014 in Kenya. St. Paul's Kiwanjani Day Mixed Secondary School sits in the heart of a diverse community, 412 students walking its halls, each carrying their own faith and their own story. The school was young, only 8 years old, sponsored by the Methodist Church but open to all. When you enrolled, you signed a contract, a promise written in ink that you would wear the uniform exactly as prescribed, no exceptions, and every parent knew the rules and every student agreed. Then one morning, everything changed. The deputy governor made a request asking that Muslim girls be allowed to wear hijabs and to wear white trousers under their skirts. It seemed like such a small thing, a simple accommodation. But within days, some girls appeared at the school, adorned in their hijabs and trousers, in defiance of the uniform code that everybody had signed. And just like that, the fragile peace at the school began to crack. The school authorities did what they had to do. They enforced the rules. The uniform policy was, after all, uniform. But the Muslim students weren't backing down. Protests erupted. Window panes were shattered. Teachers found themselves face to face with students demanding change. And Christian classmates were caught in the crossfire of a conflict that they never asked for. The Muslim students marched out in a wave of defiance and headed straight to the district education officer's office, seeking allies in their fight. 3 months of tension passed before anyone tried to fix what was broken. The director of education called a meeting, bringing together the school board, the PTA, and reps from the Methodist Church. 22 people gathered in that room to vote on the future of their school. The votes were counted. 18 voted against allowing the hijab, and 3 were in favor. One person suggested a compromise that the girls be allowed to wear longer skirts. The decision was clear, democratic, and final. But things got interesting. The director of education looked at those results and did the unthinkable. He ignored the majority decision and issued a directive that hijab and trousers should be worn. The principal who stood firm on the policy was transferred. He was gone just like that. And the Methodist Church found itself watching its school slip from its grasp. Its authority had been undermined by a government official. The Methodist Church would allege that one director whispered a warning that if hijab was not allowed, there would be complete bloodshed. The Methodist Church in Kenya was not going to take this lying down, and they sued. They dragged the Teacher Services Commission and the education directors to the High Court, and their anger was sharp and focused. How dare you transfer our principal for enforcing our rules, and how dare you overturn a democratic vote and impose the hijab on our school? This was their institution, their spiritual mission, and somebody was trying to rewrite the story without their permission. The case against the Teachers Commission was dismissed on a technicality. The court suggested that they use internal channels first, but the directors of education had to answer for their actions, and they stood before the court and explained. They allowed the hijab to stop chaos and to give students peace of mind before they took their national examination. It was a pragmatic solution. Then a new character entered the story. Mohammed Fugisha, a parent with daughters enrolled at St. Paul's. He didn't just join the case, he actually transformed it. He filed papers that turned this dispute about dress codes into something bigger and something more constitutional. His argument cut to the bone. Forcing Muslim girls to choose between their hijab and their education was no choice at all. It was cruelty, dressed up as policy. The hijab wasn't a fashion statement, it was faith made visible, and the constitution protected that right. It wasn't asking for much, just a limited form of hijab, a compromise that would let girls be both Muslim and educated in the same breath. The High Court sided with the Methodist Church. Their ruling was swift. The decision to allow hijabs was discriminatory. It was unlawful, unconstitutional, contrary to school regulations. The Muslim girls would have to stop wearing the hijab and the trousers. But Fugisha wasn't finished. He appealed and he came prepared with 18 grounds of appeal. The wearing of hijab to him didn't give Muslims any special status. The High Court had failed to see that hijab was a manifestation of religion itself, and they ignored the doctrine of accommodation that lives at the heart of discrimination law. There was no law forbidding religious expression, and perhaps most importantly, the court was wrong to call St. Paul a Christian school when it in fact was a public school. The Court of Appeal listened and they agreed. The High Court decision was overturned and Muslims could wear their hijabs and trousers. Justice seemed to have arrived. But the Methodist Church refused to accept defeat. They took the battle to the Supreme Court of Kenya, the highest court in the land and the final word on justice. And they came with a technical weapon. They alleged that Fugicha's arguments and cross-petition did not follow the rules of pleadings in human rights violation. In fact, he wasn't even a party to the original case. He was just an interested party who intervened and introduced new issues that blindsided everyone. In their view, the case should go back to the High Court and start over. Besides, allowing the hijab would discriminate against every other religion that couldn't manifest their faith in the school. And it was their argument that Parliament was the right place to settle religious and secular controversies, and not the courts. Fugicha was now elevated from an interested party to a first respondent and adequately fired back. The church had their chance to respond and they blew it. The Teachers Commission and the Education Director stood with him. They prayed the Supreme Court to accommodate the hijab under freedom of religion. It was simple. The Supreme Court deliberated, and when they announced their decision, it sent shockwaves across the country. The Supreme Court sided with the Methodist Church, but not entirely on the merits. They never even got into the heart of the matter. Instead, they ruled on pure technicality. Fugicha's arguments should never have been entertained at the High Court because he was not a proper party to the suit. He was just interested, and interested parties can't force new issues into a case between other people. His paperwork was defective and his processes were flawed. The other parties couldn't adequately respond to issues that they never expected to face. Case was a solemn process between specific parties, and Fugicha had disrupted that sacred process. The court acknowledged that the issue mattered to the nation, but insisted that it had to reach them the proper way, through the professionally competent chain of courts with issues properly framed and argued. Anyone who wanted justice on this matter would have to go back to the High Court and start all over again. All the Court of Appeals orders were dismissed and the case was thrown out. The Muslim students were stripped of their right to wear the hijab, not because they were wrong, but because paperwork was not perfect. But one voice on the court refused to stay silent. Justice Ojwang wrote a dissenting opinion that was burning with conviction. For him, it wasn't about procedure. It was a real question of children trying to practice their faith while getting an education. Fugicha wasn't merely an interested party. He was actually the beating heart of the case. The constitutional right to dress according to the religious belief had consumed most of the time at the High Court and the Court of Appeal. In fact, both courts had addressed his issues head-on and delivered authoritative judgments. To send everyone back to the High Court wouldn't help anyone, and it was simply a waste of time and resources. On the substantive matter of the hijab, Ojwang completely sided with the Court of Appeal. The Methodist Church sponsored the school, yes, but by law, they had an obligation to maintain spiritual development while safeguarding the religious beliefs of others. The school existed in a multicultural environment where balance was everything. And that balance will not be destroyed by letting some girls wear hijab and trousers. It would only be strengthened by it. But Ojwang was just one voice and the majority had ruled. In Kenya, Muslim girls lost their hijabs on a technicality. The constitutional question was left hanging in the air. But now Ghana faces its own reckoning. Wesley Girls Senior High School insists that it cannot allow Muslims to manifest their religion on their premises. The nation watches and waits. Will the Supreme Court provide the clarity that Kenya's courts avoided? Will they tackle the substance or go behind procedure? The answer will define what it means to be both faithful and educated in Ghana. The stage is set, the arguments are ready. Follow Super Law GH Studios for more real stories, real cases, real people.